Background, we're going to cover the founding of the kingdom, the peak, and their eventual demise.
Basically, everything you need to know about Thrace.
Exactly.
This is the chronicle. Not
Every
too long though.
yeah. See what you did there with the Chronicle. I see what you did there. Everything we know about these guys, pretty much, is from the Greeks. I think that's important to start with. I'm sure you probably picked that up in your research too, Rob.
Yeah.
And it's important to start with because, firstly, we should be really thankful to. I mean, in case you don't know, we should be really thankful to the ancient Greeks because basically they invented history. I know that's a bit of a maybe oversimplification, but they pretty much did by starting to write things down. But just be aware that concepts like non-bias writing and things like that, these didn't really exist back then, right? This was
No.
something written by Greeks for Greeks, and I guess they probably wouldn't have imagined that people at this era are using their sources as like the only thing we know about that time period. It's kind of amazing.
Also, just quickly, I want to throw out there. You're saying people who started history. I think the Egyptians might have that one over the Greeks.
Oh, but I mean, I don't know about that, man, because the Egyptians like put stuff into stone and whatnot, and that was interesting.
Yeah,
But I feel like the
that's
Greeks
the
actually
writing
like
because we translated it and we know what it means. And
I don't know. I feel like the Greeks actually wrote a full story, of events of what
I
happened when
guess
it happened.
they're more of a storification of it rather than the
Yeah.
just the inventors. Yeah,
This
okay,
is the
all right. I
debate
see
in
what you're
itself,
saying.
really. It's a debate in itself. Because
Yeah.
I feel like things like the ancient Egyptians or even like the Persians and stuff like that, they kind of wrote like, I am king, I did this, I conquered
Mm.
this land. And that's something. But the Greeks were like, and he stood in the chamber and he looked them all in the eye and he said, is there no man here who can do it? Like it makes it
Yeah, it's
cooler.
just more of like that the dramification. It's the
Yeah.
dramification of history.
There's more detail. I'll put it. At least
Yeah,
we can say there's more detail.
yeah.
Yeah, let us know in the comments if you disagree with that one. But I think I'm good there. So the Thracians themselves, they didn't write things down, but they were described as illiterate ruffians, basically by the Greeks. They were a martial, warlike people, which in some ways can be a mark of respect, but generally, I guess is quite in keeping with the Greeks, as they saw them as like kind of lesser barbarian types. They weren't as urbanized as the Greeks. They didn't have significant city states like Athens and Sparta that were around at the time, but instead they lived more rural lifestyles. Nobles lived in forts, but pretty much it was very much tribal still. In fact, important to note that even the word Thracian is an exonym. It's a word given to the peoples by the Greeks. It's what they called them. They wouldn't have called themselves Thracians. They kind of used it as a way of categorizing a bunch of tribes in this area that had a bunch of things in common. And it's kind of like how we sometimes categorize peoples, maybe, for example, like native groups, indigenous groups of certain areas. Like in our Sweden episode, I think we talked about, what were they called again, Rob? The ones in Lapland?
The Sami.
Sami, that's it. Well remembered. That was my segment too, so good job. Yeah, so like the Sami people, these are obviously a collection of different peoples that have different, but we kind of group them under one banner, and it's kind of the same even all the way back then. So the Greeks kind of put all Thracians under this sort of one kind of banner, and they did have a lot in common. To be fair, it's not as if they weren't the same, but in some ways they were different. Just keep that in mind as well. So to show you roughly whereabouts they were, for those of you watching, I said it at the beginning, but they're at the crossroads of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. Visually, I've sort of represented where their territory roughly was, but just bear in mind that we also have archaeological evidence of Thracians having contact with modern-day Romania, modern-day North Macedonia. So their influence does extend out.
I do find it interesting, by the way. I find that the Bulgarians seem to be the most patriotic towards Thrace as a kingdom, whereas even though it kind of crossed these borders, what I've noticed it seems to be the people who are most interested in Thracian history is Bulgarians.
It's fascinating. We kind of then this is something maybe I thought maybe would come up towards the end of the episode, but we can talk about it now. That really the Thracians are ancient Bulgarians, and I think the reason why, as you say, that the Turkish and the Greeks have less association with them as well. The Turkish obviously migrated to the area much later in the timeline, and it wasn't Turkey back then, right? It's just Anatolia with loads of other separate regions. And the Greeks, they kind of more associate themselves with like the Athens, the kind of lower down side of Greece. I think maybe that's probably why. Whereas the Bulgarians, again, jump into the end of the episode a little bit here, but the Bulgarians the Thracians were never wiped out. Spoiler alert: they never completely died. Instead, they were sort of ended up kind of making contact with the Slavs essentially and becoming Slavicized. And then even the Bulgarian people have a really interesting history, which I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but even they actually migrated from Central Asia. They have a really awesome story about five brothers and how they formed Bulgaria, and how like they were actually kind of like a Eastern, like Iranian peoples that became Slavicized, and then I guess also kind of merged with the Thracians to become this sort of modern day what we see as Bulgaria. But it's a hell of a tangent for a start of an episode. So yeah, so far I've been making them sound a bit like, as the Greeks did, like ruffians and stuff. But let me put some things, archaeological evidence that give them some more credit than perhaps they were. So firstly, some Thracian gods were actually adopted into the Greek pantheon and later the Roman pantheon. That's something to bear in mind, right? They can't have been that ridiculous if some of their ideas were spreading like that.
Orpheus being the most famous, by the way.
Ah, great! Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that because I couldn't remember the name, and I was just gonna
Amused, yeah.
I was gonna fly past it. I hope you didn't ask me, but I'm glad you actually already knew. So they used Macedonia-style coins, which sort of suggests that influence, that cultural contact and trade. They also had contact with other cultures like the Scythians. I've already used my tangent limit today. I don't have any left. But basically, Scythians, nomadic horse people from roughly the Ukraine area, that also Eastern Iranian peoples that went around the Black Sea, basically, right?
If you're wondering, by the way, they're going to come with my bonus topic. So.
Oh, is it? Oh, nice,
yeah.
nice. I'm glad. Yeah, they sounded interesting. I didn't really dive into them in my research. I'm looking forward to know more. So anyway, we both spoiled our bonus topics for today. We never normally do that. It's usually a surprise.
No, it's not a true spoil. It's not a true spoil. They're just mentioned in it. They're just part of it.
Okay, wicked. Yeah, and even much later, they even came into contact with the Celts, Celtic peoples of Europe. So there's a lot of contact there. However, long before the Celts and after the Scythians, they had a much larger contact with the peoples I haven't mentioned yet. Do you know who they are, Rob?
Is it the Persians?
Persians, absolutely. So they showed up around 500 BC, and it was Achaemenid Persia, which is like the big dog in the Persian history, right? This is like Cyrus the Great's empire. Of course, by this point, it's beyond his timeline. I think it's like Xerxes and stuff like that. And we'll get to that when we cover a Persia episode someday, which I'm uber excited about.
I am so excited about that stuff. I know it's like 300 gives you that hype for that sort of thing. It's so cool.
So
I know
cool.
It's not really the historically accurate in any way, but it's still.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes these things can contribute to like the fame of something, like Spartacus later, continuing the spoilers, So anyway, Persia invaded Thrace and actually conquered it, and then they launched their invasion of Greece. That invasion of Greece, the famous one, the 300 thing you just mentioned, that came from Thrace, and they used that as a launch pad. They also invaded the Scythians from there as well. And so this time that Thrace was under their rule, we've also found archaeological evidence of cultural mixing there. Around here, so after the Persians essentially failed that invasion of Greece and end up falling back, Thrace starts to sort of bring itself back as like a more independent peoples, and this is where what's known as the Odrysian Kingdom was founded, which is I think it's maybe fair to say was the peak of their civilization, or at the very least, it was the closest they ever came to forming their own empire, which is why it's going to be the focus of this episode. And I will pass over to you, Rob, to unpack that for us.
Okay, so we've already discussed the Persians. So after the Persian defeat in the Greco-Persian Wars, spoiler for anyone who doesn't know, particularly a couple of battles I mentioned, Salamis and Plateau, or Plataea. So this massively weakened the Persians' influence in that kind of general Balkans region. So they kind of left that space for a kind of a new power to rise up in that area. So our first kind of main man to talk about is a guy called Teres the First. So as we said, up until this point, the people of Thrace were tribal. So every tribe ruled themselves. They had their own rules, laws, customs. And again, as you said, they wouldn't all be called. Might be called this is the Teres tribe. This is the whatever. Everyone would have had their own little name for each other. But again, I say the tribes they had royal palaces. They were rich as hell. Also, by the way, around this area, Thrace was not a poor region.
Nice.
Let's put it that way.
They're
I'm
associated.
going
I
to.
might be wrong here, but I saw a little like mention in my research about gold. Are they associated with quite heavily associated with
Oh,
gold, or am I wrong?
I will be when in about 2 minutes. I'll put something up on the screen
Okay.
that's gonna show you some of the treasures that have been found over time. They have found
Wicked.
some awesome stuff. Awesome stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so he started uniting the tribes in around 480 BCE, and by about 460s BCE, he had managed to unite 40 tribes. So this kind of again that is coinciding with that kind of reduction of Persian influence. So he was believed to be a very strong military commander and diplomat. I mean, again, you've managed to unite 40
You
tribes.
need to. You need to. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to.
Every time you're uniting the tribes, you got to be like
Yeah,
Genghis Khan like levels almost.
exactly. But they've still, even at this point, they very much remain tribes. They were still like, even though they were joined together, they were bound by treaties, kind of marriage alliances, tributes.
I saw it as
But
a written in a really interesting way in my latest segment. They were like a
Mhm.
confederation of tribes. Thought that was a really good way of
Yeah,
putting
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. That's a perfect description. But the foundation was this control over this Hellenic Persian trade. So if you remember from your map, you showed their region was that covering that border seemed kind of Byzantium, which obviously was still a massive city, going across the way into Greece. So much trade would come across that way, and they obviously they were the ones who, if you control trade, you get a lot of wealth.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So
We've talked about that before in our other Empire episodes. I think it came up
exactly.
particularly in the Swedish Empire stuff.
Swedish Empire,
Yeah,
exactly. They
and
were
that's
that was how they regrew the Sweden to its kind of heights,
and that was
was
way,
through that
way,
control of trade.
way later. That's more than
Yeah,
like one.
it doesn't change. It
Yeah,
doesn't. It
yeah,
does
it's
not
the same
change.
thing.
Um, so as we said, their Thracians were very wealthy, and we've discovered some amazing treasures. So here's an example of one. Look how detailed. This is all 24-karat gold, by the way. Huge pieces.
How big? I
Um,
wish there was like a human like hand or a banana for contact. Like
so I've seen that you see that circular tray, that big circular
yeah,
tray
in
in
the
the
back.
center.
Yeah.
I've seen that. I haven't got exact dimensions, but from what I've seen of what it looks about like 40-50 centimeters wide.
Okay, so these are big. Oh, of course, because
Big
these are like handles
pots.
and vases
Yeah,
and pots. Yeah, yeah. Okay, because
yeah.
they looked a bit small at first, but no, that's okay. So yeah, for
And this is just
listeners,
one. This is just one of. I believe this is called the Pangyasharite treasure.
okay, you want to
And if you
explain it
want
to
to see
listeners
it,
because I don't even know what to how to
okay.
describe
Also,
this.
if you want to go see it, there's 3 replicas. I know one of them is Sofia in Bulgaria. Again,
Oh,
it's
nice trip to Bulgaria. Let's go.
yeah. So there's 8 pots and one big tray. On the tray, it's got like looks like human heads all surrounding it,
Yeah, it's very
and then like
decorated,
these
ornate.
and these like got like vases. Some of them look like goats' heads or lambs' heads. I think it's
Yeah,
goats. And then
yeah, it
there's
does
a
look like that.
handles coming from it with all like hugely ornate kind of like kind of very Greco in style, very Hellenistic. And again, one of them I found 3 different amazing treasures. This is my favorite that I put up. But again, check out, just put in Thracian treasures into Google when you're done with the podcast and just look at some of the wonders that they had. Amazing stuff. All right.
Speaking
So
of
before,
wonders,
yeah,
sorry,
go on.
speaking of wonders, this show is pretty great, ain't it, guys? And if you think so too,
Yeah.
if you could drop a like on the video, it help us so much to get discovered. As you can see, we're still very small. Or if you're listening on a podcast app, a 5-star review goes a very long way. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we're very much enjoying doing it, so I hope everyone is enjoying it with us, and leave us a comment as well. Okay, so before you jump in and tell us about King Terrace's son, I want to talk about the unique unit in the upcoming DLC.
Okay.
So this is the Rhomphaia Warrior. So I want to specifically more talk about a weapon itself. So if you want to bring up the image on screen, so we have three different weapons here. They're kind of different variations of them. So the first one on the left is the Sicker, and that's more like a dagger. So that'd be a single-handed weapon.
Yeah, a little bit curved on
Uh,
the end. Yeah.
all of them are curved. All of them are curved. It's one of the traits of them. The middle weapon is a Folks. That is, so all these are used by the Thracian. The Folks is technically a Dacian weapon, but it still kind of was used by Thracians. And the final on the right, that's the Rhomphaia itself. So slightly less curved than the Folks. but still a huge long blade. So it's a two-handed weapon, long blade, and it's only sharp on one side and curved.
So this
So my
unique,
first go on.
sorry to interrupt you. So this unique unit coming up in Chronicles is named after the sword.
Named after the sword.
Nice. Okay.
It's an anti-cavalry weapon. So we'll get into the reason why I believe it's an anti-cavalry weapon coming up. But firstly, which side do you think sharp?
Oh,
Single side is
okay.
sharp. Which side do you think
So
sharp?
only one side is sharp, yeah?
On all of these, only one side is sharp. Which side do you think
I
sharp?
think it's the side that curves inwards, like as in how do I explain this? Help me with my English. You know, not the outer, like
Not the outer side,
the
the inner
inner
blade.
side
Yeah,
of the curve. Surely that's the sharp one.
correct. Which is actually very different from most other later weapons. So if you think about the like kind of Persian cavalry, how theirs was sharp on the outside.
Hmm.
If you think about katanas, which are curved, theirs is curved sharp on the outer edge,
Oh yeah.
on
Okay.
the
Okay.
wider edge. But these are one of the few which I found which are that inner edge being sharp rather than the outer edge.
So why is that? What's the difference?
So it's the intention is it's because it's a good cutting weapon in that sense. It's really good for cutting.
It makes
So
me think of like
it's
hacking and slashing through like long blades of grass. That's why I said it was on the inside.
exactly so comparatively between the folks as well and the Rhomphaia, the folks is even better at cutting the curved edge. This is like this a super cutting weapon. However, it's not as good at thrusting. So it's not as diverse as the Rhomphaia itself.
That makes
And with a
sense.
tightly packed troop formations, the Rhomphaia was better balanced between it. Um, so you may be wondering again, so say anti-cavalry in the game,
Yeah.
why were they anti-cavalry? Why is this weapon considered anti-cavalry? So that Rhomphaia is between 1.5 and 2 meters in length. It is a
That is
beast.
long. Okay.
It's huge, including
Right.
the handle, by the way. Big two. Some of these, by the way, have a bit shorter handles. Some of them I've seen have really long handles as well.
Okay.
Big handles, massive sword blade. So they were kind of like almost this hybrid between a polearm and a sword.
Okay.
And the reason apparently they were really good in the terrain in Thrace was hilly and broken. So in open plains, you'll be much more reliable with a spear or a pike against cavalry. Um, but the Rhomphaia was so effective in this kind of broken ground because you weren't able to brace in the same way. You needed more to be able to cut.
Right, and like at angles and stuff, I suppose.
Exactly. So they were absolutely incredible for that kind of terrain. And even apparently when in Rome were fighting the Dacians with using Thracian men, they started bringing back the Rhomphaia for a small period
Oh, cool.
to use against them in those battles. Um So why did it fall out of love? Because actually the Rhomphaia is only associated with Thrace and only associated with Thracians between this period. So why did it die? Why do you think? Why do you
Phew.
think it disappeared?
Man, could it be something to do with armoring horses? Maybe. I don't know.
A little bit. There's a little bit, but there's one more specific reason.
Oh, guys, help me in the comments. I don't know. What is it?
There's Rome. Rome likes uniformity. And this is not so they used it for that little bit when they were doing this, but they wanted weapons that could be fighting on every terrain. They're effective in every
I
terrain.
see. So they didn't
So
want to. I mean, it makes
as
sense. Versatility.
exactly as Thrace was eaten up, and also again, it's so much easier to make a spear and a gladius. This is a really tough weapon to make it right.
Okay.
So it was because they rather have a gladius and a spear as that kind of standard weapon, as they kind of as they were eaten up by it, they wanted the standard kit, and this didn't fall into that.
Given the success of the Romans, I think we can say they probably made a good choice. So, yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, but as I say, I love this thing, and I was saying to you when I was like, oh man, I just talking. I didn't tell you any details. I was like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want one. I really want one of these swords.
This is Seb from the future asking you to leave a 5-star review and a like anywhere you are listening. Thank you, and back to the podcast.
All right, so Caltries, Sitalkes, got the wrong way around. Son of Teres the First, he ended up doing a lot of work to build on his father's beginnings. He massively expanded the kingdom's reach, and this was basically the peak of the kingdom. So he's doing a great job. I'll bring up an image that shows essentially the extent, but for listeners, it's like a lot. Basically, it spreads down towards where Byzantium would be. It goes all the way towards Macedonia and further up as well. So this is quite a large piece of territory. Something to note though is that the coastline is actually controlled by something called the Delian League. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I've never heard of that. I never even coming up in my stuff.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it either. But then as soon as I found out what it was, I was like, oh, okay, makes sense. So the Delian League is actually just Athens and all their allies.
Oh,
So, yeah,
that makes sense.
so it's
'Cause
all of the
I read
city-states.
Athens in a lot of stuff, but I've never seen called the Delian League, right?
Yeah, so the Greeks' sources, they claim that this guy, I keep forgetting it, Sitalkes, Sitalkes could raise like 150,000 warriors if he wanted to, which is massive for the time period.
Yeah,
That was
that's
probably
huge.
an exaggeration. The Greeks, they like to tell stories a bit like I like to tell stories, so they exaggerate the numbers for dramatic effect. But it still demonstrates that the Greeks saw them as a serious force during this time.
I mean, I actually have a quote which I remember. I haven't got the exact quote, which was it was something like they were so numerous. They were like the second largest kingdom, only behind something like Indo something. And there was like I remember reading, like they were literally from a Greek kind of philosopher saying they were like one of the greatest sizes of people in
Wow.
the area.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I mentioned Athens, and they are very relevant to this story because a major part involves them, and it's the Odrysian Kingdom, the Thracians, Sitalkes, right? They all had they had a strong connection with Athens, and Sitalkes really kind of built relations with them. He married one of his nephews to the Athenian elite, and so when the Athens-Sparta War kicked off, which is the Peloponnesian War, by the way, for those of you not versed in it, historians, like more dedicated historians, will be like, of course, everyone knows Athens v Sparta. I'm gonna go on the assumption that you're a little less familiar with it. Okay, so they have essentially these city-states have a big falling out, and everyone's picking sides. You have Athens and all of their Greek city-state allies, and they are allied with the Thracians. The Thracians offer support, whereas the Spartans have other allies, and that includes Macedonia, which will be, of course, important. So, in return, though, the Thracians, nothing's ever free, right? The Thracians did it so that the Athenians could give them naval support for their own expansionist goals. So, as part of that, then, the Thracians wanted to keep the Macedon busy. So they launched a massive campaign against them, which was ruled by a guy called Perdiccas II. Basically, it's not Alexander yet, is what I'm trying to say, and it's not his dad, Philip. I will show you, if you go to the next image, a few warriors and sort of what they generally looked like. They always have these weird pointy hats for some reason. They look like gnomes. Yeah, I'm not sure why.
They do.
Yeah, they always
weird.
And they have that really like ancient look, with the clothes are basically like a little bit like a robe, but it's a hot country, so like the bare body's a little bit more open.
Toga is what the word you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, but one thing I really wanted to point out here is the shield. You can see the shield is an interesting shape. If you go to the next image as well, thank you, and you'll see that this shield, which is the icon that they've chosen, the game developers have chosen to symbolize the civilization, the Thracians, is actually based on this shield, and I think it's called a pelt or pelt.
Okay.
I know that's what it's called. It's the pronunciation I'm not sure of. And to the right of the in-game logo, I've put an actual sort of representation of it, in real life.
Did you look at why
they have a shield that shape?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Oh,
my guess is that the spear goes in through the gap at the top.
thrust through it. Yeah.
So what this looks like, guys, is it kind of looks like a masquerade ball mask. It's that kind of shape. It's like it's like a circle, but the top kind of dips inwards. So it kind of, and it's cool. And they've drawn like eyes on it to look intimidating in classic ancient warfare style. They draw like eyes on the boats and stuff. It's got like a nose and all that. So it's very cool. I just thought I'd make a mention of that for the Chronicles game fans. So it was successful for a while, this campaign against Macedon. But later he ended up having supply problems. He found it really difficult to feed such a large army. As well as the harsh winter conditions were coming in. And if we know anything from war, we know that winter is a bad time to be campaigning. So on top of this, though, it wasn't just these conditions. It was also that Macedonia had been, or Macedon, perhaps I should say, had been bribing Sitalkes' advisors to tell him to go for peace. So they'd be like, hey man, it's not a good idea. I think we should pull out. I'm not sure we're gonna win this. Yeah, and unfortunately, Sitalkes was unaware that his advisors had been bribed. So with all this in place, his massively large army, which we said is a great strength, in this case is kind of becoming a weakness. He can't feed them all. So he ends up withdrawing from Macedon in the end before fully conquering them, because Macedon was definitely losing at this stage. Sitalkes' story ends when he ends up dying up north against another Thracian tribe of all types. And so after him though, unfortunately, the Thracian influence started to weaken. And over the next century, there was more and more fragmentation. So it was kind of going in the reverse. Before everything was becoming more centralized. The tribes were being unified. Now they're kind of going back to their old ways. They're becoming more and more decentralized. There's some succession struggles as well. And while obviously decentralization is in some ways, I'm sure for the local peoples living there, we'll talk about the life of the peoples in the next episode, maybe that's a good thing in some ways. But in other ways, it means you're less unified, and if an invading force comes in, for example, you're going to find it a lot harder to actually react and have your defenses. And that brings my section to a close, Rob, and I'm going to pass on to you to talk about what we've dubbed the Macedon Domination.
And I think that's the right name for it. So let's start off. So the Thracians were fearsome warriors. So how were they conquered by the Macedonians? So it starts with Cotys I, who ruled between 384 to 360. So his rule ended 100 years after Terra's first rule ended. So exactly 100 years afterwards, if you get to the time frame. So as you kind of mentioned, he inherited a massively fractured kingdom. And actually, I would say this guy was the bee's knees. He worked to reunite it against Athenian influence.
Sorry, I have to stop
the bee's knees.
The bee's knees. That's a good one. That's a good one. An English expression, guys. You're welcome to use it.
Yeah.
It's yours now. Go on.
And actually, by the way, if there could have been potentially a very different future, because there is strong evidence that under Cotys I, the empire actually exceeded it under Sitalkes.
Okay.
Genuinely, this guy was incredibly, again, because Sitalkes inherited a kingdom that already was growing. He inherited a kingdom in ruin and really brought it back to the throne.
Nice. I thought it was just from straight downhill from here, but apparently no. There's a bit of a
there's a bit of resurgence for 24 years.
Okay.
And then he was actually assassinated by a couple of Plato students who claimed it was because he wronged their father. But they were honored on their return to Athens, so maybe not. Because this guy had been causing Athens a lot of problems.
Okay.
And then this is where the downfall happens. Because the succession of Cotys completely fractured the Odrysian Kingdom. So Cotys' son, this is my favorite name so far, Cersobleptes.
Yeah.
I don't know why, I just love that name. It's great to say.
It's the blep at the end. It's
the blep. Yeah. He became the next ruler, but he inherited a war with Athens and was opposed internally by two pretenders to the throne. So this kind of created, and interestingly, I almost got really curious, it created a new Three Kingdoms era, which it's happened in so many places when you actually think about it. I keep on hearing about different Three Kingdoms in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
I guess it's a classic kind of like, Mexican shootout style.
Yeah, it's quite cool. It's quite like, it's, it's a three-way, right? Everyone loves one.
Exactly. So Philip II, to rule Macedonia, and that obviously bordered Thrace to the west, he was thinking, what can I achieve here? So Philip II didn't actually initially ride into Thrace. What he did was really smart. He backed one of Cersobleptes' rivals, the one who directly bordered Macedon, and Cersobleptes sought backing from Athens to fight against his rivals. And it turned into this sort of proxy war, where Athens backed Cersobleptes versus Macedon back to, I can't remember his name. I ain't because there's too many names.
I was actually thinking, proxy wars are not a new thing, are they go way back.
All this was weakening Thrace because they're massive amounts of infighting, and so over the next 18 years, that's how long this kept on going for. They were just weakening, fighting amongst each other, deciding who was king. So much so, they only took Philip 2 years to bring Thrace under complete control when he decided to invade.
2 years.
2 years.
That's That's impressive. That is
crazy.
impressive to take a whole kingdom, I suppose I should say, a whole kingdom.
Yeah. And again, because it's tribal, it's very much you can't just take take the crown and go, we own you now. Some of the tribes can just it's very difficult to control Thrace, and very much so that when 3 years later Philip II died, guess what they do? They rebel and they returned more to tribal states with no. But again, at this point they had no uniting king. So they were completely returned to tribal. No one took the throne.
Odrysian Kingdom is over, really, at this point, ain't it?
Over. It may not be over for good, but it's over for now.
Okay.
This is the point that Alexander the Great took the throne, and he smashed everyone in his path. Let's just put it that way. After his death follows the Wars of the Diadochi.
This is essentially Alexander the Great carried on. You know, he's conquered all the territory he's going to conquer, but then he dies, and his entire kingdom fragments amongst his generals, and they all
very
fight
common around this period. It's super common around this era, which again is why the Roman Empire is so goddamn impressive. Because if you think about it, it's how did they stay united for such a long period of time? It's crazy. Whereas this guy conquered so much so quickly, but then there was no plan of what would happen afterwards. So then it was kind of like family, friends, generals were all kind of warring over what happened. And what do you expect the Thracians to do at this point?
Rebel.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, this is where the Odrysian Kingdom reformed again.
Oh, okay. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go on.
This is going to make us... if you don't know the answer to this as well, we're going to look like such fools.
Okay.
Why is it called the Odrysian Kingdom? Because I never encountered this...
You know what? I actually don't know, and that's going to make us look really
so
bad.
maybe
put a little note on there or something. This is why.
yeah, well, there you go. This is the disadvantage of doing it our way, where we don't share what we found in advance. It's more fun for us, and I hope it's more fun for you as the viewer. Which, if you're enjoying it, please follow or subscribe to stay tuned for more, because we've got way more coming.
So the Odrysian Kingdom only lasted for another 30 years again, and there's only one king it lasted under. And again, it turned back into a regional kind of tribal states after that point. And then obviously it started to become more Hellenized. So history starts getting really patchy. So I'm just going to jump to the end. It's quite a big jump here. So the true end of the Thracian culture identity was the Romans. We already discussed it a little bit with the Rhomphaia, but there were some Thracian kings during kind of the early rule of the Roman Empire, but the region kind of like slowly transitioned into becoming just a province of the empire. So this is not, though, the end of their cultural influence, though, and the Thracians remained kind of a really feared part of the Roman army, but that was kind of like the end of that Thrace as a kind of concept.
If I remember, yes, exactly. And if I remember correctly, there were many like successful Roman generals who were from Thrace, and they used this kind of like this reputation that seemed to have stayed around since all the way back to the Greeks, where they'd kind of seen as these martial-like, war-like barbarian types. These Romans, they kind of leaned on that reputation, that kind of don't mess with me, I'm a Thracian kind of vibe.
Massively in terms of their army, so that was almost like a badge of honor, being like, I'm from Thrace, I'm Thracian, was that badge of honor in the army. But it also was a real badge of honor for their gladiators.
Oh, okay.
Which might lead us into
my bonus topic. We've never gelled like that, because you never know what my bonus topic's going to be. But yeah, I thought I can't tell the story of Thrace and Thracians without talking about Spartacus. It is outside the timeline a bit, but the connection is there. And with bonus topics, we tend to go a little bit wild with it. We pick a random thing that the other one usually doesn't know what we're going to talk about, and we just surprise each other. And I picked Spartacus. So Spartacus, if you're unfamiliar, is a film. I think there's been like 3 films, or movies, I should say, for the Americans. And I also believe it's a Netflix TV show. I haven't seen it, and frankly, I don't trust Netflix to do a good job with this kind of stuff. So I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong. If it's worth watching, drop in the comments. I'd love to know. So the real story, though, is that Spartacus is Thracian born, and he was during the times of the Roman Empire, so long after the Odrysian Kingdom era. And Thrace is a province at this stage, as you pointed out, Rob. And Spartacus is likely a soldier or a mercenary, it's believed, just because of he's quite good militarily later in this story, so we kind of assume he must have had some kind of role there. And at some point, though, he is enslaved, and he ends up being trained as a gladiator in Italy. So the story goes like this. He and about 70 gladiators escaped one time, and they they escape from the gladiatorial school using kitchen tools, and they seize a wagon of weapons. So it's like really cool sort of movie vibes. You can see why they've made films of this, right? They flee to Mount Vesuvius, and they begin raiding. So they're attracting runaway slaves as they do this, freeing more and more slaves, and also other unhappy rural poor, people just not happy with the status quo. They join his rebellion. And the movement really snowballs into tens of thousands of men, women, and children. And they win a series of battles against the Romans. Poorly organized Roman forces, admittedly, but still very impressive. Spartacus gains fame because of this as a capable and disciplined commander, which is why I mentioned, suspected maybe he was, had some experience there. And he often tries to, at this point, he's trying to march his followers like out of Italy, probably towards the freedom of Gaul or Thrace. So he's trying to get them out because he knows if they get captured, they're done, right? Romans don't they don't like rebellions.
You'll be going back to the Colosseum and fighting something which you will not be able to win against.
Yeah, and they definitely don't like slaves rebelling, right? So it's you're really trying to help people. He helped a lot of people escape and find freedom. So Rome did eventually take the revolt seriously, though, and they assigned Marcus Licinius Crassus, who is the richest man in Rome, to have command. And this guy imposed harsh discipline on the legions, and he slowly hemmed in the rebels. He started bringing it back, regaining that control. And Spartacus attempted, he saw the writing was on the wall, and he attempted to break out towards Sicily, which is that little island sticking off the end of the Italy boot. He was hoping to cross using pirate ships, but the deal fell. Like it didn't go through for some reason, and now he's trapped in southern Italy, and his forces end up being crushed. Spartacus himself dies in this battle, and his body was actually never found. Around 6,000 captured rebels were crucified as a warning to everyone else.
I thought they'd be taken to the Colosseum to show that, but I guess crucifixion also very much shows what you mean.
Yeah, brutal. And it became known as the Third Servile War. And it's also sometimes called the Spartacus Rebellion as well. And it's the largest slave uprising against Rome ever. And Spartacus, because of this, he became a symbol of resistance to oppression throughout all of history, not just even beyond the Roman Empire. He was later admired by revolutionaries, by some socialists, and of course modern pop culture as well, these movies I've mentioned. So what about, you might be thinking, what about the bit with the I am Spartacus? I am Spartacus. No, I am Spartacus. Unfortunately, it didn't happen in real life. In the film, essentially,
I have to say though, that's a great Hollywood writing.
I was going to say,
because a lot of times you see this stuff and you're like, oh, that's just no way going to happen in history. That's a load of nonsense. But that is like, it gives that kind of grandeur to it.
It's so good. Yeah. And for those of you unfamiliar, basically, the Romans win the fight, and they promise to spare the men if they identify Spartacus. They want to know who he is so they can punish him for everything he's done. And then one by one, these comrades, they stand and they shout, "I am Spartacus!" And in other words, they're choosing solidarity over solidarity and death, basically, over betrayal. And it's a very cool moment, and I think it's really done a lot for basically Spartacus in modern culture, in my opinion. I think that's one of the great scenes. And as you say, I'm fine with a little bit of artistic embellishment and license. And I think that's a great scene. So yeah, and that's the end of my bonus topic.
So mine's a little shorter than yours, I'd say. I want to talk about tattoos.
Okay, nice.
So Thracians are super interesting, in which they had very much a blend of their kind of surrounding cultures. So the main ones being kind of Greek, Persian, and Scythian, I'd say, are the main three that seem to take a lot of influence from. Because if you imagine as well, they had lots of times they were invaded, controlled, and also had a lot of trade going through them. So they had a lot of influence from kind of these surrounding regions, where they still had a very unique culture, but they had a lot of influence from their surroundings. So people mistakenly see kind of most of their influence being Greek, but if you kind of look at their love of tattoos, it's much more closely aligned with their Scythian horse lord neighbors. So
really?
if you want to bring up on screen, I've got this. This is a really old. This is a pot. In this pot, you can kind of see some of the tattoos.
Yeah, they've got markings and stuff.
And it's not just the men; it's the men and the women. So it's Greeks and Persians view tattoos as a mark of shame. So it's like deserters and criminals were branded with tattoos to say you are marked for life as being a slave,
it's not something you can
criminal.
hide.
Exactly. Exactly. However, to the Thracians and Scythians, warriors and nobles used tattoos as a sign of importance. So Thracian nobles would use tattoos to display their heritage or show particular familial significance.
Okay.
And warriors would have dedications to the gods. And so apparently the more tatted you were, the more important you were.
That's cool. Dude, definitely if you were a Greek or a Persian who'd been like exiled for desertion, you'd make your way to Thrace, right?
Exactly.
You'd be like,
exactly.
and then you show up and be like, what's up? I'm one of you.
But it also kind of adds that opinion for Persians and Greeks had that they were kind of these savages.
Yeah.
Because again, they probably weren't. Obviously, we get the very Greek view of this, and they go, they're covered in tattoos, they're savages, they're that's like criminals would do that. So you could see that we probably had
The
that very
perception
skewed view.
yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the writing about them is Greek.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in fairness, we don't know. Maybe they were savages. You know, maybe they were, but also probably not as much as they're described. You know.
I mean, something we haven't covered, which we'll cover more in next, is some of their gold-specific stuff, which I'm looking forward to covering. There's more specific stuff about that, which again I think proves that they weren't.
Wicked. Well, do you have anything else you want to add to that, or?
No. That's save it for next. Save it for next.
Guys, if you've enjoyed this, the best thing you can do right now to help is like the video or leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Leave comments. I reply to every single one. Subscribe and follow to stay tuned. And I want to give an extra special shout out to Tuffykins, who pretty much always comments on our videos on Spotify. And dude, our videos, our episodes on Spotify. And we appreciate it a lot, man. So thank you so much if you're listening to this one. And another special thanks to Mihai and Nutty, our YouTube channel members. And we will see you